Hi everyone, thank you for coming. We're still welcoming everyone in, so it will just be a couple minutes until we start officially. So if you just be patient, please. Thank you. I'm so excited. Hi everyone, thank you for coming. We're just waiting for 2 more minutes and then we'll start. I've put photo consent forms on everyone's table, so if you don't mind signing those. Thank you.
Before zero invented, it's a zero when you treat
The wine is coming, bless. Hello, everyone. Yeah. 1 second, the music's been turned off. Thank you, Annie. So, hi and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to my event. This is what we're framing as a pilot event for a series that I've called Hedonistic Histories. It's Taxidermy and Tipples, hopefully the first of many. Yeah, so this is my master's project, and I just wanted to start by thanking both Ruth and Annie for supervising me in this process, as well as my friends that have turned up, and Annie who's come to help out as well, so thank you, everyone. I'm now going to provide a brief background on my... No? Okay. Historic interests as to how I got to start this project and why. Hedonistic Histories forms a part of my master's project, and it forms a part of my master's project which looks at culture and elites and all that. And I'm exploring how hedonism has become a culture of the elite and is replicated in periods. So I've chosen to look at 17th century France and 19th century Britain because they're my two favourite periods, and I'm limited in what I can use as a comparison in my master's. I've always been interested in social history, especially the French Revolution, which is actually, weirdly enough, the revolution in the elites, but how I got interested in all of this. My main question was, how did the aristocracy keep their power for so long, especially when it all crumbled down in 1789? I quickly learned that it was Louis XIV and his absolute rule and his creation of the Palace of Versailles, which made his power, which maintained his power. And it created a false idea that the French monarchy were financially stable and powerful. In my undergraduate degree, I furthered this idea, but I linked it to a different century, the 19th century, and I tested my idea against wine consumption, which is why we've got a wine tasting today. My dissertation focused on wine consumption, power dynamics, social differentiation in 19th century metropolitan Britain, and my research found that activities such as wine drinking asserted people's power and maintained their rule because it was just a show, and like Versailles was, wine consumption, they're both the same thing in proving people's power. Today, my research aims to show that these cultural displays are hedonistic in nature and are replicated across societies and time periods. So as I found in my separate research, I noticed this link, and that's what this project proves. I've chosen to demonstrate this pattern across the 2 centuries I told you about, but I'm certain with further research I can prove my theory is applicable to all the time periods of elite history. Sorry, this next change. Although my research explores the parallels between 17th century French court and 19th century country homes, Taxidermy and Tipples focuses predominantly on taxidermy and wine consumption within the 19th century. The slideshow behind me and this introductory talk will provide the overall link with French court and how it fits into my research, but the event today focuses more on the taxidermy you can see over there, unless you're on live stream and then you can't see it. Taxidermy was often a large part of Victorian elite country homes, as were cabinets of curiosity, which both demonstrated a person's refinement, wealth, and education. Hunting was used for pleasure, a sport of the elite. It was previously a military requirement, which Annie speaks about later in her talk. But this is where the link with Louis XIV's court fits in. Shooting was a palace sport, whilst also used in his many territorial wars. Although Versailles did not display taxidermies in the same way that 19th century elites did, they had other equivalents. So, for example, they had their Baroque art, busts that they displayed, which as you were walking in, you'll have seen pictures, and philosophical figures. This was all just to demonstrate refinement, education, wealth, a bit like taxidermy. You can see both examples of these throughout the screens behind. Both styles were physical manifestations of power and evidenced refinement through education, knowledge of high arts and culture. Versailles was a gold-gilded prison, which aimed to impress its inhabitants on the world stage with its physicality and great expenses, just as Victorian homes were built to astonish guests and demonstrate cultural influence. The ultimate link between these two periods is that they used performative and theatrical methods to assert power and status. Hedonistic activities included the taking of mistresses, shooting, balls, only to name a few, and wine consumption, because hedonistic cultures were performed and they were physical expressions of power. This event, in its focus on taxidermy and Tipples, looks at within these buildings, from Victorian decorative styles to etiquette within wine tasting, which I'll speak about later when we actually get to the wine part. Although we will predominantly be focusing on wine and taxidermy in the 19th century, the link between the two periods is central within my research. This is why we are framing this event as a pilot event to a series. So if the connection between the hedonistic cultural reproductions is of interest to you, on the QR codes on the leaflets, you can scan, find my website, Instagram, blog, and everything I've just spoken about now will be spoken about in more detail there. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to pass on to Annie.
Bear with me, everyone. I'll just get my PowerPoint out. You don't want to miss these images, I can tell you. Sorry. I just leave it here. Amazing. It's magic. Okay, so not a very confident start, but it's my absolute pleasure to speak to you this afternoon just for a short period to give a bit of context and introduction to the taxidermy side. When Abby asked if I would give a quick talk, and she said it was going to be around taxidermy and wine consumption, I just knew I would have to be there. So I'd like to thank Abby and Ruth as well for everything setting up for today. So I'm a historian at Newcastle University, and I work on 19th and 20th century rural Scotland and Ireland with a particular interest in aristocratic families and landed estates. So naturally, taxidermy and elite cultures feature quite a bit in my work. I'm going to do very much a whistle-stop tour, just 10 minutes this afternoon, around the development of taxidermy as part of elite displays in country houses in Britain and Ireland, which really took off in the 19th century, and that's kind of domestic species as well as kind of more exotic imperial taxidermy as well. Just to give a bit of context for the object handling and the rest of the event. So I should probably say, and you'll probably have guessed already, that there's a lot of dead animals in this presentation, many of which are now endangered species, not least because of the activities that we're exploring today. So just a little kind of pre-warning about that. So much of the sort of taxidermy display that we're looking at this afternoon really came to the fore in the mid to late 19th century. but it drew on much kind of longer routes than that, as many people know. And it was the height of fashion in those decades, and part of a wider trend for the wearing of furs, of animals. This is a pair of hummingbird earrings that the V&A keep in their collections in London, as well as other jewellery and accessories, most famously as a scarf, the sporran is a kind of a classic example there. So it was taxidermy as a display for interiors, but also for the person as well, which was highly fashionable and very widespread in this period. Taxidermy very much became in this period a global activity as well. So there were centres of global importance in taxidermy expertise in Britain in this period, which developed because there was such a rage for it, for interiors. But it included specimens from all over the world as a reflection of Britain's growing global empire in this period as well. So we think of big game hunting in this period, particularly the sort of early to mid 20th century, converting dead animals into tableau, into exotic features for the drawing rooms, billiard rooms, hallways, and other rooms in country houses. This is Kinloch Castle on the Isle of Rum, and this is the kind of entrance hall. And I show this image because it has the kind of classic stag's head, so great Scottish kind of symbol, but with a tiger and lion and leopard skin rugs as well on the floor. This kind of juxtaposition of the domestic and the imperial in one room. Of course, from about the mid-20th century, as fast as taxidermy became fashionable, it drops out of fashion drastically. And although they remain ubiquitous in many country houses today as part of historic collections, for many decades it was deeply unfashionable and actually became symbolic of the regressive nature of the aristocratic classes in this period too. So we don't tend to see much in the way of new additions to taxidermy collections from the mid-20th century onwards. But we'll go back, as I said, and Abby's already mentioned the sort of roots of these displays in cabinets of curiosity, and kind of helpfully surrounded by modern versions of these in this room today. Going back to the late 17th and 18th centuries, when small displays, you see this is almost like a cupboard, this is at Wallington Hall, just up the road. Almost kind of small cupboards of small objects were pulled together, carefully collected and curated, items of so-called curiosity, often insects and birds and eggs, shells, rocks and minerals. These would be rare, sometimes exotic items, sometimes sourced from overseas as well. And there would be sometimes it'd be fashioned out to be legendary items. So narwhal tusks, unicorn horns, phoenix's eggs, that kind of thing as well. And as Annie mentioned, these displays were really about demonstrating the learned and scientific collecting credentials of their owners. So not an interior design item or decoration, but actually about demonstrating a certain level of education. A classic example here, the Marquis of Bute, who was a friend and colleague of Joseph Banks, one of the founding personnel of the Botanic Gardens at Kew. The Marquis of Bute's seat on the Isle of Bute, Mount Stewart, is full of these kinds of items of curiosity and scientific and taxidermy collections. So from these very private, almost small and almost museum-like origins, the specialised skills and craftsmanship in taxidermy began to develop, certainly in terms of technological advancement from the early 19th century. And we can take here as one of the global centres of that industry, when we look at the work of this gentleman, John Hancock, who this museum was originally named after. So John Hancock was one of kind of taxidermy pioneers, 1830s, 1840s, who took advantage of new materials and techniques, which ensured a longer shelf life for taxidermy. So you don't see that much early taxidermy because they used to use kind of very toxic chemicals like arsenic, etc., to create it, and it kind of rots it from the inside out. But Hancock was experimenting with new technologies to make sure taxidermy lasted longer, but also it could become more dynamic. So this is where you have settings, a bit like this example here, using artistic and aesthetic modes to create taxidermy displays. So almost like three-dimensional paintings, rather than simply specimens kind of laid out to look at, and we'll see some examples of that later. And so he set a trend for these naturalistic, often exciting tableaux, and maybe they'd be put into boxes with painted scenery and plants as a kind of backdrop as well. And as well as looking exciting, it was argued at the time, or believed at the time, that these tableaux assisted public education and understanding of the natural world. So kind of introducing new animal species or bird species to the wider public. But of course, sometimes it could go a little bit wrong when that understanding was lacking. This is my favourite example of the wombat. So the wombat skin was shipped back from Australia, but because the taxidermists didn't really know what a wombat should look like, they didn't quite pull it off correctly. So that business of taxidermy was growing, that technological development hand in hand with the related fields of furs, hats, beaver hat, jewellery, etc. And with this kind of item, you could see it's not just elite culture. It began with elites, but it spread out more broadly in society. It became very popular with the middle classes as well. So that's kind of at the root of its popularity. But back to the country house, because we are here to discuss elites. This is Balmoral, kind of, I don't know, I suppose, kind of epicenter of Victorian kitsch taxidermy. And that's because from about the 1830s to about the 1930s or so, taxidermy becomes one of the defining features in the interior design and decoration of country houses. So the taxidermy comes out of those cabinets of curiosity, and it becomes a decorative item and an item of display and status, not just of scientific or educational status. It comes out of those rooms and it comes into the hallways, the dining rooms, the billiard rooms. Few public rooms would escape the rash. And that's kind of where I got interested in taxidermy myself, visiting these houses on a regular basis. And it's so ubiquitous, it's almost like wallpaper. So I thought, well, what's that about? So taxidermy becomes part of the fabric of houses and their decoration, rather than something rare, specifically for the display of taste and education. So why is that? Well, it's linked, of course, to the massive rise in field sports from the early 19th century as one of the key leisure activities of Britain and Ireland's aristocratic classes, a fashion that catches on with the growing international plutocratic classes, kind of the Americans coming in, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, etc. Deer stalking, grouse and pheasant shooting, fishing for salmon and trout become amongst the most popular of aristocratic leisure activities, and whole estates orientate themselves to supporting this activity. And you see the classic image, which almost sums up 19th century Scottish culture, the monarch of the glen. Now, the monarch of the glen is alive in this picture, but we know as we look at it that what he's really there for is to be shot, stuffed, and put up on the wall. Taxidermy becomes then a key expression of landed elite culture, highlighting the residual military roles that historically aristocrats carried out in Britain, but that had kind of died away with the professionalisation of the armed services, and instead they exercised their military prowess in sport and displayed the trophies of this new war on their walls. This is the Prince of Wales probably one of Britain's most enthusiastic shooter of animals in this period. Stags' heads, trophy heads as they're known, were most common, either stuffed or boiled. Examples of both here at Mar Lodge. The search was always on for the great royals, those with 14 points on their antlers. But lastly, taxidermy became an expression of global elite culture as well, and part of Britain and Ireland's imperial project. So it became part of the imperial experience for elites to go abroad for big game hunting and to bring those back to display them at home, making them bring the empire into elite homes. This example from a 1912 catalogue of Roland Ward and Sons, which are one of the great taxidermy firms in Britain, is an elephant's foot designed to be a drinks cabinet. So you may be familiar with the elephant foot as umbrella holder, but I've never before seen one as a drinks cabinet. So I'll just, but these kind of novelty items were more common than we might expect. And we can see, I showed you that picture of Kinloch Castle before, landed families, aristocratic families with imperial connections began that trend, classically seen in rugs, tiger rugs, lion rugs, in country houses, the elephant feet as umbrella stand. But some went a bit further. So, for example, the 5th Duke of Sutherland at his seat at Dunrobin Castle in Sutherland set up a museum in the grounds, which you can still see. This is how it looks today. Most of this was put together between about 1910 and 1950, so it's actually relatively recent. The 5th Duke was an avid big game hunter, as you can see, and set up his trophies as this kind of museum in the far north. But arguably, of course, this imperial taxidermy trend denotes another shift in the role and culture of the aristocratic classes, one which took them away from the actual levers of political or economic power into a much more ornamental role. So hunting is nothing if not time-consuming. I mean, part of the point of hunting is to eat up time when you're a member of the leisured classes and don't need to work. And it's also an expensive hobby. So hunting as a kind of aristocratic activity, yes, it can be argued that it's a kind of symbol of their power, wealth, and status. But you could also argue on the flip side of the coin that it was also a power of a symbol of their relative decline in the 19th and 20th centuries. And the traditional hard political and economic power of the aristocratic classes slowly being replaced with soft power, with culture, heritage, symbolism. So, just to finish then. So after a spell, as I mentioned at the start, of deep unfashionability, there's kind of images of country houses being cleared out and sort of piles of taxidermy being burned on the front lawn in the 50s and 60s. Interestingly enough, in the last decade, taxidermy has become fashionable again, but among very different social groups than the aristocratic classes. It's much more about that current search around sort of hip culture, a search for authenticity, the pursuit of irony in sort of decorative form. Taxidermy in country houses, of course, has been around for so long, and it's so ubiquitous, is that it's almost part of the furniture, almost like, as I said, like wallpaper, as you walk into these places. What modern taxidermy seeks to do is to shock and to amuse, to take a more ironic and knowing kind of look at our relationship with the natural world, as some of these images suggest. So I'll just conclude by suggesting that, and this, as this event is doing, we're all here to think about, is that it's probably time for a critical re-examination of taxidermy. It's probably long overdue and valuable in understanding the material culture, self-expression, self-understanding of the aristocratic classes in the past, but perhaps our own contemporary thinking in society today. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your patience in listening to me.
work here at the museum. I have been.
Sorry, would you mind standing there for the live stream?
Thank you. So out of date with technology. That's awkward. Gotta say, like, amazing congratulations to Abby for getting this to work, because throughout the whole pandemic, we've yet to master doing a Zoom presentation in this room, so you did it in an afternoon, so it's impressive. So again, my name is Ruth and I work here at the museum. I've been working with Abby to put this event together, because my role here is to do the public engagement, and so I've been giving her a little bit of guidance, although I think a lot of it comes naturally anyway, which is amazing. And I'm here today to sort of introduce some of the handling collection on the table over here. So our handling collection, we use a lot with schools. There is a lot of ethics, that's debatable with taxidermy, but we like to try and make school children's experience of the museum as close to reality as possible. And we try not to conceal too much from them. So if they've got questions about, endangered species and why we've got bits of taxidermy on display and why we're handling real animals that were once alive, we try to explain it to them in a way that isn't going to terrify them, but also gives them a sort of honest response. So I'm going to start to hand these objects around, and I have counted them. So we used to have a fox. There's the fox. We've had children pulling tails of rabbits. We've had children snapping bits of animals before. We've had ears broken. So but they are to be used. And I should say that all of these animals have been acquired ethically and through proper means. There is, I'm sure you're aware, items in the collection in the stores, trophy heads and such like, which historically perhaps don't have the most ethical biography to them, which is why I introduced Anna, who's over there, and she's been doing some research into the honest biographies of some of our taxidermy in the collection here, which is quite fascinating. So starting to unpick that history that is perhaps tarnished by the actions of people in the past, which nowadays we have to address and not conceal, but try and address it in a way which, opens discussion up, but also allows us to utilise the items that we do have in the collection for learning and education. So I'm going to leave the screen for a moment. I'll start to maybe hand them around, or would you prefer people to come to the table, Abby? Yeah, okay, let's come to the table. That's sort of chaotic rather than handing a giant fox around the room. So me and Anna are going to be over here. You can hand items, you can touch the items, you can pick them up. I'll be able to tell you a little bit about the animals we do have on display. And then Anna can give you a bit of information about the research she's been doing. If everyone could be back in their seat by 22:04, I believe, because that's when we'll start the wine tasting. So also use this time to have a bit of a breather, use the facilities. I'll open the door, you can go in the garden for a little bit if you like. Make sure you're back in your seat by 22 for the wine. All right. See you over here.
Zoom live stream still going. Okay. Right. Yeah, it's still on. Hello, live stream people. We're just having a bit of a break and doing a taxidermy drop in, so you can listen. No, it's just as people
You don't have to, obviously. It's a good perspective. And feel free to said at the end what the wine tastes like. Tell people I'll put the taxidermy on the table and they can put themselves and sit and type.
This is how go so you can hear the information.
Yes. Well, typically I'll try and speak so that they can hear me down here as well. He's one of the most popular items in the collection. Very, very soft.
It's very soft.
It's really sad. It's all things that will have died naturally. So all the stuff we do will have died naturally. It will have been hunted or killed for the purpose of taxidermy. Some of the items in the store is a different story, but we don't have anything. So you can hold it if you want. It's too sad. He's got no eyes, which is awesome. But yeah. This is a fully grown It's a fully grown so it's not a baby, but
What's this week?
I mean, you can feel it.
It's hungry. It was so funny. Like these were all just like alive and really still, and then they took some. Yeah. That's a very nice bird. Respect. It's very, very nice.
I have
I don't know.
Yes, I
So I've had to learn quite a lot about not just species, but like the process of taxidermy. And the museum used to have on staff a person that did the taxidermy, but they don't have that anymore. So I think they actually like. People watching, this is their picture. This is what we use for children quite a lot. They like touching
So you have to clean it, right?
They do get cleaned. Every year, roughly, they go through a cleaning process and they get frozen. And then they go through a freeze. They're kind of like.
So is it a thick like skin and then what's inside?
It's preserved. It's like it's kind of like plastic material and wire.
Yeah.
They build the skeleton from, and then they like stretch the skin back through. So they kind of and wire and bits and pieces, and then it's very that's quite scary.
It's just, yeah, I mean,
They're not their real eye. They're glass eye. And it gets preserved. So it gets treated. Yes. That's what Annie was saying in the past. They use things like arsenic that stops the hair falling out. And it stops the process. it takes quite a long time to treat the inside of the skin. It's really gruesome.
You never thought you'd learn so much about it.
No. And then once it's treated and it's still flexible, they stretch it.
Is it the same process for, obviously different animals have different sort of skin. Does it work for like the sort of lizards,
It's different chemicals. So if we've got a couple of very broken crocodiles in the cupboard, the children pull them and stretch them. They're waiting to be seen by the conservation. But yeah, different chemicals with different kinds and different processes for like reptiles.
it takes like a long time, like you know, like if you've got like your elephants and you're like your big animals, like
The elephant is
okay. Could you
I don't know how you do it. It's the same process on a giant scale. Sometimes with that big, but it can just parts. Can't start to take. It's just gone too far and you could be preserving something which was not hygienic. So it just basically, if you have a dead animal, as soon as you freeze it, then it kind of stops that decay process. Like soon after it's died.
how would that make you up with big games? Like when you would say when you go big games, like obviously there's the availability of ice. Like I'm aware that obviously there's like ice picks and stuff in like the big manor houses. Like if you have a big game with
This was taken kind of there and then. So animal was killed. I mean, I don't know.
yeah.
Since it's a bit loud, I'm going to do a walk around so that everyone can see the room. These are the screens. We have 3 of them. And all the tables are laid out with white tablecloths because that's classy and in keeping with the theme of the event. And flowers. We have a good turnout, about 50 people. Hello, Annie. Hello. And this is the room. Oh. I thought since it was a bit loud, I would take our viewers on a tour of the rooms. And this is all the wine we'll be trying. There are 3 types of wine, which I'll actually not spoil. I'll tell you later. Since it's a bit loud and this hybrid thing is becoming a bit difficult, I might try and get Ruth to do a Q&A so that the room is quieter. So I'll now put the laptop back down, but if you just wait patiently for 5-10 minutes, then the wine tasting will start. Thank you. We'll be back.
Yeah, so we're getting up to what we've been asked to do is, because the online audience can't hear what's being said at the table, so there'll be more chance to come and ask questions at the end. And one thing I should say is that I'm going to put some of the taxidermy on the table here. This is our Abby's Hedonistic Histories photo booth. So at the end, you can come and have your photo taken with this backdrop, and you can tag the project and the museum on social media if you like. It's a little fun activity. You don't have to do it. We just thought it would be fun to have a little.
We insist.
Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? I know I'll be answering a few questions. Yeah.
How is that even? So that's a basic criteria of how you taxidermy like the little things, but
So, for online, we've been asked how you taxidermy a fish. The honest answer is
Yeah, it is. So doing the fish is the most technically difficult. I mean, I don't do taxidermy myself, but it is the most difficult technically because the skin is so fragile. So I know that today, for example, if you catch a salmon and would like it taxidermied, it costs something like £50 an inch to create a fish. So it's not too dissimilar, but they kind of apply a kind of resin to the skin. And so if you see the fish, also it's not like plastic, but you know what I mean. That's my non-technical explanation for how you taxidermy fish.
Yeah, I was saying we used to have. I didn't work here. We used to have a taxidermist on staff.
Yeah.
Who would be given and the stories are just unbelievable. Can't be true. He would be like, I've run over this badger. And they're like, what? So until recently, there was a massive freezer chest at Discovery Museum full of roadkill that people had brought in to be taxidermies, but then we don't have a taxidermist anymore. So through the proper means that got disposed of.
The great taxidermy firms of the 19th and 20th centuries are pretty much all out of business now. And then when it went out of fashion in the 50s, it was just museum employees would have taxidermists. But now it's in the last 10, 15 years, it's grown again, and individuals are training and establishing their own businesses as taxidermists. So if you all fancy a career change, it's there. It's a growing market.
Yes, one here, then one there.
just to build on the fish question, if you say it's the most difficult animal to put through the taxidermy process, does that mean having it as an item in your hallway is more significant?
Yeah, I mean it's not any more difficult to look after. It's easier to clean and that kind of things. But it would probably be the most expensive item in your hallway, probably. So if you do see a fish around, some pubs have them, and I'm always like, do they know what they've got here? Or would you like to sell me your fish? So it would be in that cost to it. Yeah.
You wouldn't think it was a fish.
No,
You wouldn't
see
imagine
it.
it was expensive.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Got one here.
One there, yeah.
Sorry, I've sort of grown up with a misconception that taxidermy was sort of animals, which actually isn't all the time, is it? So that's one sort of question. And the other one is, how does taxidermy sit with objects of daily conservation and embalm dictionary thing. Is that taxidermy? I don't know, I can't recognize my mind what's what.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the Damien Hirst stuff, I think that's one of the roots of the modern reinvention of taxidermy as a kind of a art or craft. Do you know if it's an art or a craft, really?
Because it is a craft in how it's made, but it's produced as a contemporary work of art, sculpture.
Yeah. So, but the embalming and the fish side, I mean, I would call all of that taxidermy, even if they're using different techniques to achieve the same output. So in my mind, I would call that all taxidermy, even though some's embalming and some's stuffing or boiling. You know. Yeah.
And there's a whole different set of ethics that come into play with that, because it's not just taxidermy, it's like it's cut up, it's sliced, it's preserved in this really sort of glorified way, like I don't know if the wrong word, but it's very much, you know, look what we've done to this animal. It's not just in a sort of odd sort of pose on a rock. It's sliced and I don't know, it's you could go into a lot of detail about, is that right or wrong? Did that animal have a choice about that? You know, it gets quite.
No, it's putting me in mind of Lenin, actually. And is it Jeremy Bentham at one of the University of London? I mean, they did make the choice. I think that Jeremy Bentham said he put his body towards scientific research. But yeah, I mean, are they taxidermy?
There's a lot more to sort of discuss and explore. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer.
No, but it's a really interesting question. So I've got one here.
Yeah. How did the gentry value their taxidermy? Would it be based on how hard it was to hunt it, or the skill that it took to create it? And how does that play into like hedonism and stuff?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of the rarity animal or species, and that could often be, you know, is it a tiger from North India versus a deer in the Scottish Highlands? So I think it was around the rarity of the animal and the sort of taxidermy setting it was kind of put in, and I think the ultimate thing is if you say I shot that. You know, so you have a kind of personal connection to the item then, it's that kind of trophy side of things.
It's interesting in Anna's research, it's awful and fascinating at the same time. There's a holiday leaflet for big game holidays or something.
Yeah, the Belgian Congo. This leaflet was produced in 1950, so actually quite late. It's advertising the Congo tours is what it was used to be called. Kind of advertising the certain areas as a map of Congo, highlighting certain areas of where best to go game hunting and where best to find the rarest species. And then there's a list onto the other side of this leaflet saying how much of each animal of these rare animals is worth, how much tax, and then their horns and everything as well. So it's not just the skins, it's also the went and the killed them, but sometimes they only took certain bits, things that were more expensive. So that was advertised this leaflet, given out possibly to the gentry as well, and the people that were allowed to go hunting in these colonial areas, because not everyone was allowed, it's mainly just governors and administrators who were given special permissions by the colonial governments, given out to these people, and went and did this big game hunting in colonial Africa.
So, I mean, infinite problems with that. And, but again, it's something we can't just be like, don't pretend that didn't happen. We've got to acknowledge that it did, and we've got to talk about it in cultural settings.
And I guess the challenge for museums and museum collections is that there's also that angle of the sort of scientific interest and collection as well, and that value, but which makes it even more complicated to address the sort of legacies and how we look at the collections today.
One more question, then just for time, I want to make sure we do the.
Do you want to check if there are any online questions as well, just in case, as I've opened up the live chat box?
Ooh, all right.
Back to the cultural, Tinley, you mentioned that in the early era of the aristocracy, all of a sudden, then it fell out of fashion.
Yes.
Why was that at that time? Did it fall out of fashion then?
I think it's partly to do with, there's a few things around that. One is the coming end of empire and also restrictions or reductions in aristocratic finances at that time. So there's major taxation reforms. And although we're talking about multi-billionaires, their finances become much more constrained. And also from the 1940s, we also see like a massive reduction actually in country houses in this country. So the great kind of decline of the country house, a lot goes to organizations like the National Trust, but in the mid-90s, at the height, there was roughly 5,000 country houses in Britain, and something like 2,000 were destroyed or demolished in the sort of mid 20th century period. 2 a week in the 1950s were being demolished. So there's these kind of big kind of structural issues that sat behind that decline. So in a sense, the decline of taxidermy just mirrors the decline of the aristocracy. And becomes almost symbolic of that, as I said, they're sort of, become deeply unpopular in the post-war period, socially and politically. And that taxidermy almost symbolises that, I think, as well.
We've got one question online, and then we'll do the wine tasting. So I can't read who wrote it because my eyes are getting so old.
It's Andrew.
The size of is there a limit to the size of taxidermy? Anything you can taxidermy? I was just going to say.
Well, there's elephants.
There's elephants.
Could you taxidermy a whale?
Well, I
You
don't
talk
know.
about icing the skin, gotta keep the skin cool and like relatively freshness of the skin. Could you do it?
No, because I think
in a whale?
you see models of whales and their skeletons, but I don't think you could. I don't know of a whale, but it's easier for mammals. But I've seen bears, elephants, giraffes, rhinos. So I think there'd be a limit to the size of a kind of fish, but not maybe a bird or mammals. That's my best
The
guess.
giraffe that's on display, it's only the head is technically real taxidermy. The actual in the living panic gallery, the body is actually fake, but the head was actually taxidermy by Roland Ward, who just before. So in the gallery, it's only the head; it's not the whole body of the giraffe that's actually taxidermy.
We got offered a whole giraffe. We got an email sent to Ruth, and would you like to buy a giraffe? So yeah, that was offered. Should we do the wine tasting, Abby? Should we start?
I was actually going to say, whilst we pour wine, if anyone else wanted to look up taxidermy, that would give us a bit of time to pour wine. We'll just go to the bathroom break. Now over time.
All right.
How much would a piece of taxidermy cost? Like,
Do you mean now?
both now and then? Or they like a art where you could see like increase the investment, or would you think?
I mean, I was saying before, it's still relatively expensive. You have to like you're talking tens of thousands of pounds maybe a few £100. But that's still a lot cheaper than it seems like some changes
I'm just
Thank you for the online question, Dad. We're about to do the wine tasting, so I'll get the room to be quiet and I'll count all the bottles. I did put on my website all the names, so hopefully some of you have managed to get some of your own. If not, yes, this white wine. There are three wines. And that will start shortly, so just drink some wine. I'm going to read it to the room in a second for the online people to see. This is the bottle, it's a white wine, and in a minute I'm going to tell everyone what it's all about. It smells like white wine. Hi everyone, I'm sure you're all very excited to try what I think is the best part of the event, the wine. Everyone in front of you in your leaflets, and if you're viewing this online, there was a downloadable link on my website, which you should all have. You can see the wine tasting notes, and there are some pens on the table, so if you just fill those in as you want. The first wine that we're trying is a Reserve Royal Grenache, Le Grand Duc Vin de France, so as you can guess, it comes from France. It's a white wine, which is quite clear, and before we get into the details of the wine, usually, I mean, some people have drunk their wine, but okay. I can't wait either, it's fine. But typically when we're tasting wine, what we do is we just give it a little swirl, then we have a look, so swirl, see, check out the colour of it, it looks quite drinkable, a sniff. And this one's quite light smelling, and then that's when you can start to taste it. So just to tell you a little bit about the wine as you taste it, it's a blend of Vermentino and Grenache grapes, revealing fresh and zesty aromas of apple and lemon, which I'm sure you'll taste when you taste it. It's got a stone, fruity, palaty taste, and it's a dry wine, so, I mean, self-explanatory, but in case you don't know, there are different types of wines. So dry wine obviously dries your mouth out a little bit, which is why it goes really nicely with fish. Dry wines go well with white meats on the basis of fish and other meats like that are quite oily. So when you've got my hands are full, so it's difficult to show you, but on your tongue, your taste buds are like little circles and like U's almost, and they get filled with the grease of the fish. So the benefit of a dry wine is that it also cleans your tongue, so you get to taste the fish more and the wine, which Annie looks surprised, but it's true. So the name of this wine, Le Grand Duc, which translates to the Great Duke, takes its name from the large and powerful eagle owl, as you can see on the label, which I will put on the picture table as well, so you can get a picture, for some wine bottles too. So the eagle owl is often found hunting for small mammals amongst the twisting vines of many French vineyards. I'm reading this because it sounds better than how I'll say it. The majestic and bower shape, the commanding aristocratic presence of the bird, leads to its nickname, the Grand Duke. So as I said, the style of the wine is white, fresh, and fruity. The grape is Royal Grenache. I should be seeing more people writing this down on their wine tasting. And if you haven't already, now is the perfect time to try it, since you know all about it. Yes, question?
So there are some vegans and vegetarians in my family.
Yes.
So I would love to have commentary about which wines go best with those particular cuisines as well.
Okay, that is a very on-the-spot question, and I don't know a lot about vegan cuisine, so it'd be difficult for me to answer that without researching this first. But I can take your email, and I'm very happy to ask. Oh, I should have said, this was very generously supplied to us by Cavavan, and there are leaflets. If you like the wine, you can take those. But I can speak to the supplier for you and get you an answer over email. I can also put the answer on my website in case anyone else would like the answer to that question. Nice. Once you finish your whites, we're going to chat again. We're going to walk around and or out the rosé. Chatty table over there, so everyone else is fine.
Yeah.
Right, bring it ready.
Just to keep you all updated in the loop, wine's been down, filling up on the rosé, which I'll explain.
Rosé wine. Does everyone? Yeah.
Hello, online people. This is the and this is what it looks like. I thought it was white wine. It's rosé. If I can start to turn it down, I'm going to start about the next one. Thank you. That works.
All right, is everyone ready to try their second wine? Now we have a rosé, and this is it's Le Grand Duc again, like the white wine. So it's reserve Cabernet Sauvignon Rose, again from France. This pale, very pale, I thought it was white wine. This pale, dry rosé has an aromatic nose of strawberry and red berries. If you give it another swirl, another sniff. Oh, so the swirling of it, just to explain, opens up the aromas, which means that you can, almost like a candle, then you can smell it a bit more clearly. This wine is made purely from Cabernet Sauvignon. It is an easy drinking rosé with a fruity and elegant palate. It's great with grilled meats and salads. I will get you that vegan answer. And the style is, as you can see, rosé, as I said, dry and fruity. And the grape type, for those writing it down, is a Cabernet Sauvignon. So we'll give it a try now.
That red wine, final wine, about in a minute. And yeah, stay tuned.
Oh, I need all. Okay. Hi. So last but not least, the red wine, which is my personal favourite. I don't really like white wine, although the Cavavin ones are very nice. So this wine is a Merlot, and it's called Merlot de Veneto, Rocca Estate. And it's from, as you can guess, probably from the name, Italy, and that's the bottle for the camera. So again, the swirl, sniff. This one's actually not very fragrant. It's quite dark though. So this wine has a youthful, fruity, and user-friendly style, which comes from the typically soft, fleshy character of the Merlot grape. So for, again, everyone who's writing down, the style is red medium to full-bodied, and the grape type is a Merlot. I actually forgot to say these, but I should really read out the percentages. This one is 12.5%, and I'll grab the other two bottles and read the labels of those again. Yeah, so give it a taste. I was told by the supplier that this wine is actually perfect for a tasting, as you notice, I have a recommendation for this one. This can be drunk without food. I know maybe people usually drink wine with food, but this one you don't need food for it, which makes, because reds typically, they say red meats. I personally debate that a little bit. I think you can drink it with any meat. But yeah, this one is such an easy drinker that you can drink with anything or nothing. I'll go grab the other bottles to read the percentages. So, well, if anyone's interested, the rosé is 12.5%, and the white is, again, 13.5%, the strongest one. Now try.
The camera takes the giant reminded me of that thing on QI. Decades. I kept putting them on the boat.
Hello, people who are still watching. Thank you for bearing with us. I was just talking to my table about the history, and I've realised the whole room might be interested. So we're now going to do that, and then afterwards, everyone here will be invited to take pictures. So if you've got any questions about the wine, about the taxidermy, about wine tasting, the history of wine I'm about to speak about, please type them in the box now, and then I can give you a read and an answer. But if not, the pictures might be a good time for you to sign off. If not, it won't be very engaging for you. Probably a bit like the last 15 minutes. I'm sorry about that. So thank you for listening, and yeah, type. I hope that everyone enjoyed their wines, which I'm again going to say, because I've been told to, generously supplied by Cabavin, which is in Newcastle. You might be familiar with it. If you are or if you're not, I'll invite you to take a flyer, which Ruth is very generously holding up. I was just having a chat with my table, both about the supplier and the history. So the reason we chose the supplier and not Aldi, which was a lot cheaper, was because we decided it was actually a bit nicer to support a local business, especially when they do such fantastic wines, as you just tried. I didn't mention about the prices, which was again raised at my table, purely because the quote that I was given, they were very generous with us and gave us nice discounts, so I don't have the true prices, but this is something that if you scan the QR codes on your leaflet, I can ask them for the actual prices and put that on my website, so that's all available to you at a later date. Anyway, now to my favourite part of the history. As I mentioned at the beginning, my entire undergraduate dissertation was on wine consumption, power dynamics, and differentiation in metropolitan 19th Britain. It's quite a long title, so I just called it The Birth of the Snob. Simply because it was a 10,000 long piece. Obviously can't read that all to you now. I've chosen 300 words, which I think best explains it, so I'm just going to read that off for you here. And then you can also read the notes in the back too. Alcohol consumption and the notion of a polite society predominate understandings of 19th century Britain. Differing social classes aligned with differing cultural practices from employment to consumption.
High import duties made wine a luxury commodity, which is accessible to an elite few, which is what this is all about. And wine duties increased between 1811 and 1820, which drove consumption from the masses to the upper classes. More on that later. Drinking wine was considered sophisticated, whilst drinking spirits was associated with the debauchery of the lower classes. It was a route to drunkenness rather than an expression of taste. So, as I mentioned earlier to you people, William Hogarth, Gin Lane, Beer Street, some of you may be familiar. If not, make yourself familiar with my website, which explains all of that. Victorian customs and etiquette idolised this historically privileged nature of wine. Wine and beer were considered natural drinks compared to spirits, which resulted from mass production of the Industrial Revolution. And obviously, spirits were very cheap, filled with harmful substances. The authority of elites permeated many aspects of society. They used diverse and subtle power dynamics, including dining rich wine pairings. Beyond this, British contemporaries of the period admired continental styles of drinking, which included the consumption of wine across all classes. So, for example, France. As wine was imported from the continent and not produced in Britain, duties were prohibitive to the working classes. Had wine been affordable, it is likely that the poor would have drunk cheap plonk like French peasants and behaved with civility too. So that's my dissertation part over. But the really interesting part was that the reason, even today in England, beer is a real staple drink of our country, a bit like the pub, is because Louis XIV, the man who created the Palace of Versailles, he was at war with England quite a lot, and he was trying to make an alliance with the Duke of Orange, William Duke of Orange from Holland. This all went very badly for him. So as a sort of punishment to the country, he put massive import taxes on wine, which meant that England really struggled, unless they were in the elite class, to import and drink wine. To this day, there's a trickle-down effect, which is why wine is still almost gate-kept, or at least considered to be associated with upper-class drinking habits. It's funny because in the supermarket effect, which is really in the last 15 years or so, wine has been made very affordable again. But really, there is no reason why wine should be expensive. We were explaining as well there, but at wine tastings, if you go straight to the supplier, wine's actually so cheap, it should be £3 or £4. It's really the import tax, Louis XIV, which has punished us all today. And that's really all I have to say on the history. But again, if anyone's interested, you can ask me questions now. My on-the-spot knowledge might be a bit rusty, but as I said, I'm happy to provide you all my email so I can answer in depth any more questions you may have. Or you can read my website, which is the QR code is on the back of all your leaflets. So yeah, thank you. If anyone has, if not, don't worry. No? In that case, I will invite everyone to, there might be a tiny bit of wine left, so if anyone had a particular favourite and really wants another, there's not enough for everyone, but maybe there'll be enough for a few people. Or you can have your photograph taken by me. I'm a very good photographer. And we can get your pictures not for our use, these are just for you. So don't worry if you didn't want to sign, you can still have a picture. If not, there's still the drop-in, which is available with Anna, and if you still want to talk about it. And you can also chill in the garden. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Now, as I said, it's the pictures, so it might make a lot of sense for you to leave. I'll leave this on for another few minutes in case there were any questions. We've got all the I'm being watched. We've got all the specialists who are still ready to talk. If not, feel free to sign off. Again, I really appreciate you watching, and yeah, my first hybrid event. So thank you. Bye.
Hello, Tom McKenna. You asked a question. You mentioned how white wine is able to cut through the oil of white meats like fish to enhance the flavour. Does red wine have a similar effect on red meat? Question from Corfu. Red wine, it's a very difficult question for me to answer actually, because I have a real preference for red wine. But white wine is a newer type of wine, a newer type of grape. So actually, it's got a lot more. People are necking their glasses. But so white wine's got. It's a lot more technical, let's say, and it has a purpose. Whereas red wine, the flavour is so bold that it often masks the flavour of weaker meats. So it doesn't have a similar effect scientifically, to my knowledge, about how it cleans the palate. But it's definitely a better wine, a better experience, and you should definitely just drink red wine. Again, opinion, but it's fact. I'll leave this on for another few minutes, but because I can still see people watching, so I'll keep coming back to check. But if not, here, I'll turn you towards the two. People are having their pictures taken, and that might be interesting. Thank you for watching, everyone.